I've got a very, very biased mindset myself. I'm aware that I have chosen an extreme example to show you, and you will say, well, it isn't like that nowadays, or you've got much better, and so on and so forth. But let me anyway show you this thing and see what you think about it. Oh dear. Can you put the lights on? Now, this is from, it must be about 3 decades ago, so it's a thing from the past. Nevertheless, the question is, does it point to something significant that we can reflect on? A questionnaire, it was called the Nepal Fertility Survey, and it was carried out all over Nepal. And investigators or enumerators or whatever they're called went to villages and they sat down with villagers and they asked them these questions. And they got a very low response. These are percentages. Had they heard of pills, lube, condom, vasectomy and abortion? You can see very, very low. Can you see? You can see all right. I'm sorry about you.
No, it's fine.
We can move this. Three social anthropologists saw this and were quite skeptical. So they went to the community that they knew really well, and they asked the same question. And it came up with this. And then they thought, we better check and be sure. So they asked the same question the next day to the same people. And they got that. Huh? Why did they get a higher figure the second day?
Because the people had heard of it the first day.
That's right. The person said, yes, you silly ass, you asked me yesterday, and my memory isn't so bad. You know. So, exactly, so the social anthropologists made a mess up as well. So there's no monopoly of virtue and accuracy on one side or the other. But nevertheless, this contrast remains. And here, the conclusion is, must educate. And here there's already really quite a lot of knowledge. And when you think about the situation, abortion was illegal. So if you have let's say a male enumerator going into a community and asking about abortion, what's going to be told? People say, abortion? Oh, don't know. Now, the importance of this is, okay, it's an extreme example. But if we move now to randomized control trials, how many of you have some experience of randomized control trials? Did they use a questionnaire? Did you use a questionnaire in my general impression is that randomized control trials use questionnaires. Structured, pre-structured questionnaires. In other words, the categories are defined in advance, and randomization takes place. I mean, do you need any explanation of randomized control trials?
Similar to medical trials for medicine, there are populations that are split into usually 2 groups, a control group, which doesn't get the treatment or whatever social experiment they're trying, and the treatment group that does, and then statisticians put it through magical computer programs that tell you if there was any significant difference between the 2 populations.
Thank you. That's very succinct and very clear. What I think seems to have happened is that RCTs have become the so-called gold standard. You will have heard this expression. The gold standard for research. And there's a political economy of RCTs, which is huge sums of money poured into the Poverty Action Lab in MIT, which has carried out, I'm told, over 200 RCTs around the world because of the big money which has gone into it. So to find out almost anything now, the reflex is not just a questionnaire. The reflex is an RCT because only RCTs are rigorous. And that's why I've tried to say that there's a rigor for complexity and try to define it. Yes, please.
As you were saying, this has become a donor's requirement, basically. So now we have commercial contracts, and we have to, put the RCT as part of our.
You've had that experience.
No one, but it's becoming the trend.
Yes. But donors are requiring it because donors feel they have got to be accountable to taxpayers.
Particularly if
And so they've got to be rigorous. And so they've got to do RCTs. I am strongly prejudiced against RCTs, except in the context that you mentioned, the medical one. Because, you see, if you've got an immunization or you've got a pill or something, you can have a population and you've got a standard input, which is the pill or the immunization, absolutely standard input. You've got a highly standardized, homeostatically controlled environment into which this is being placed, which is the human body. But unless any of us are sick, our temperatures are probably within about 0.5 degree centigrade of one another in this room. Incredibly closely controlled environment, the inside of the human body. And then a standardized output, which is, did the child die? Did children die or didn't they die? Or whatever. So it makes sense if you really want to test a medicine or an immunization. But it does not make sense, in my view, where you've got complicated inputs, as in community development and action. You've got complicated inputs. You've got highly diverse, non-standardized receiving environments. And you've got multiple causality for any output or any impact that you can find. I mean, supposing you have an impact which is changes in nutritional status. Well, there are so many things which affect changes in nutritional status, including fecally transmitted infections, which are normally not factored in at all. And yet they can be responsible for more than half the stunting of children in the world. But they tend not to be factored in. So when you're dealing with complicated causality, RCTs don't seem to me to make any sense. What they do is, one, they cost a hell of a lot. Two, they tie down researchers for a long time. Three, they have methodological problems which are very considerable with the controls and the treatments, where the controls and the treatments are not the same, where there are dangers of pollution. I've known several RCTs have had to be abandoned because the intervention spread to the controls. There are multiple problems of causality and of interpreting the causality. There are problems of not identifying unanticipated effects because the questionnaires are preset. And we know with emergence that there will be unanticipated effects, there will be changes in the context and the environment. And I got to 6. Learning, if any, is delayed. I mean, it's delayed by a minimum 2 years. If it's not delayed, it isn't very often not long enough for effects to have occurred, as with stunting studies which I've come across. 2 years is too short a time. These things unfold over a long time. But if you do an RCT, I've seen one RCT, and then they went back after 10 years. And it was an utter nightmare because households had changed and people had migrated, other people had come in, and they really couldn't do it. The huge effort went in, but they really couldn't do it with any meaningful learning. So In my view, RCTs, in many contexts, are a gross waste of human and financial resources and a waste of people's time. And on top of that, but this may be just my own prejudice showing through, when I read the outcome of an RCT, I don't really believe it. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why I don't really believe it. I have only come across one RCT ever that has even mentioned the possibility of this. That's to say, of the interview situation being standardized right across the application of the questionnaire, so that you get correlations which are actually correlations of the standardization of the interview situation, in which people are giving responses which they think are prudent, self-serving, polite, expected, whatever it is. And we know that happens with questionnaires. So when RCTs come up with correlations, you have to ask yourself, are these correlations the result of the interview situation or not? And as I say, there's only one I've ever come across which mentions this, and it's only one sentence. They just say, well, there's a possibility. We recognize a possibility, but they don't do anything about it. But my own experience with questionnaire surveys, and this was in India, is that the most significant variable was the investigator. And one of the challenges with any questionnaire is to treat the investigator as an independent variable and see how much is explained. It can be a lot that's explained. And big survey organizations, try challenging a big survey organization and saying, I challenge you in your next study to treat the investigator as an independent variable. And they will sort of, yes, interesting idea, we'll do that. I've challenged twice, the same organization in India twice, and they haven't done it. It would be too damaging for them because they're a commercial outfit on a huge scale. And I don't think that they're ready for or can handle that degree of introspection and of critical reflection. But that, like most of the things which I've been saying, reflect my own biases, mindset, prejudice, and anger.